की, तो उसमें हमें फ़र्क क्या नज़र आया? फ़र्क ये हुआ कि आप देख सकते हैं लेफ्ट साइड के ऊपर, ये मैंने एक एग्जांपल ली है डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ट्रांसफॉर्मर्स की मिसाल के तौर पर। और जो आप स्कोर देख रहे हैं, जो अभी मैं डिटेल में बाद में भी डिफाइन करूंगा कि है H1 से लेकर H5, H1 बीइंग बैड, H5 बीइंग गुड। ये वाला जो चार्ट है ये शो कर रहा है कि हमारी करंट हेल्थ प्रोफाइल क्या है डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ट्रांसफॉर्मर्स की। and you can see that there are fewer transformers in the low health category H1 and H2. ये जो सेंटर वाला चार्ट है, दिस शोज कि आफ्टर 10 years आपकी हेल्थ कंडीशन जो है वो क्या होगी बेस्ड ऑन द कंडीशन डाटा, बेस्ड ऑन द एज एक्सेट्रा व्हाट यू हैव इन योर मॉडल। और 21% and plus 15% altogether will be in poor health condition H1 and H2 category. और अगर आपका जो इस वक्त इन्वेस्टमेंट का प्रोफाइल है, अगर आप उसके साथ विद इंटरवेंशन देखें, तो ये आपका जो चार्ट है द थर्ड वन, ये शो कर रहा है कि इवन आफ्टर मेंटेनिंग योर इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोफाइल, some of your assets are still going to be in poor condition. Now it is giving you a signal that whatever investment you're making in that category is not sufficient. You need to invest more, and hence this chart is actually not giving you the right signal. When we move to the risk-based interventions from health-based, you can see that the same assets actually result in a lot better situation, and it only shows that 7% of the assets are in the medium risk level. So there are no high risk level assets or distribution transformers left on the same level of investment or same replacement and renewal cycle. How did that happen? Basically, because of the criticality, because of the systematic criticality, you were able to divert all your investment from low criticality and low risk assets to high risk assets. And that shows that even if some of the transformers which are shown to be in a poor health condition, even if they fail, the impact on your system and customers is not that huge. Hence, the risk is actually low. That is why you can see a much lower risk profile. So I wanted to show you these pictures so that we can actually see what we are trying to achieve and then get into the details of it. अब यही अगर मैं इसको 10 year आपको 10 year का प्रोफाइल शो करूं, सेम समरी को अगर मैं 10 year के ऊपर शो करूं, तो this is how it looks. This risk is being maintained over a 10 year period at a certain investment profile, and this particular level you see, this is natural and this will always be there. These are the defects, and these are the assets which are close to failing and have been identified as high risk or high failure assets. You will always have some of them because you are also running a reactive program on an annual basis. However, while we are maintaining that risk, while we are maintaining the investment profile, you can see we are trying to control the risk in an acceptable category. So this is where we have accepted that we need to maintain all of our assets under R3 category. So anything within R1 and R2, we would like to control and manage and maintain an investment level such that we don't have any R1s and R2s over 10-year period, which is the planning period in New Zealand. So now I will jump into the model itself, that how we are actually doing all of this, or how did we operationalize this whole system to be able to achieve this journey. So this is the conceptual model of that health and risk system we developed. Initially, what we did, most of the inspectors were using paper-based inspections. They were going out, looking at the assets, and then putting out their condition or risk health score, bringing it back, and then putting it through the systems. However, what we did, we spent about 18 months to develop predefined questions and scripts for each asset type. And then that went into the system called Field Reach, which is basically a mobility system. And it is an app on iPads, basically. And that collects all of that information, and it asks specific questions. Each inspector will go out, look at the poll and answer certain questions. And then those questions will then be translated into a health score through a predetermined health model based on weightings and multiplications or calculations we have set within the database, and will provide a health score or health score. However, the inspector will still have the ability to put his own judgment. So the reason why we have allowed the inspector to put his own judgment is to basically compare the output from the script and the judgment and see if there is a gap, or there's a larger gap between the two. Then we go back and reinvestigate why this is the case. In many cases, we found out that if there is a large gap, there are two possibilities. One possibility is that the inspector is basically was not fully trained, and they were answering certain questions in a certain way. Hence, the score what they applied was okay. However, the script resulted in a different score. So it results in some inspector training. The other way is that the script itself sometimes needs some modification or improvement, and that's why you need to go and update your health model as well, or the script and its weighting system. So once you have that health score come into your system, you basically process that through a preset model which we have developed in a database, and that takes the criticality into account. So I will dive into the criticality and all of that a bit later, how that has been determined. But basically, it's another score which determines the level of importance or impact of that asset being failed. And that generates a risk score, a criticality, and a health score. And all of that gets fed into our asset management system, which is basically just a software. So in this particular example, we were using ABB, which is now Hitachi Ellipse as our system. And then through that system, we developed reporting engine, and then most of the reporting was in different formats, including Power BI dashboards, to show us how the risk profile for each of those asset classes or asset or field type is progressing. The inspection program itself was running on risk-based criteria. For example, you have 50,000 assets and you only have 5 inspectors or 10 inspectors. You don't want to be starting and inspecting everything. That is going to be very inefficient. So you want to only look at the assets which are worth looking. So if the asset is high risk based on a poor condition or being a critical asset, those assets need to be looked at frequently. Then the assets which are low risk or are in good condition, moderate condition, or have low impact of failure, they need to be looked at less frequently or infrequently. So what did we assume in this whole system development? So here are some of the key facts which I would like to highlight. So GIS and operations proxies were used to define criticality. So most of the criticalities have to be systematic. So we needed to use fixed proxies or proxies which don't change. For example, where is the asset, what it is close to. For example, if you're talking about safety, public safety, is the asset close to a school, or is the asset is the asset in the park, or is the asset close to a hospital? So those type of aspects are easy to find out from GIS system and can be used for criticality. Other aspects are such as how many customers are connected to that asset. If that asset fails, how many customers are going to be interrupted? So those are some of the elements which are fixed and are predefined in the system, and you can pick them up as a criticality. Failure mode-based asset inspection was very important, because that is what gave us consistency in our health monitoring or inspection system. EA-AHI methods were used to assign indices, and I will show a diagram after a couple of slides that represents that framework. EA criticality methods were used to develop criticality indices, which I will also again show what it looks like. DNO common methodology, health and criticality method were also included. And what is DNO common methodology? It's a distribution network operators common methodology from UK. What we did, there was something really unique about DNO common methodology, and that is a progressive health score from 1 to 15. So we had to use that health scoring system and include that within the EEA 1 to 5 health indices system to allow the model to work mathematically. And that was sort of a hybrid method we ended up developing for our model to work. It could have been much simpler, 1 to 5 and 1 to 5 and 1 to 25 ratio, but the health is not linear. And that is what we learned. And that is exactly what the DNO common methodology uses. The health actually changes after a certain period, much um, uh, faster than in the initial years of its life cycle. And of course, the systems we used were Ellipse, which was our asset management system, and the app, which was Field Reach from AMT Cybex. Now, the systems we use, of course, the nameplate and health information was coming out of our asset management system. Inspection mobility system was the Field Reach app, and it was all on the iPads. Geospatial and additional information was coming out of GIS system, which is GTAC or Hexagon product in our case. Data handling and processing was all done through SQL, Oracle, and Excel-based data sets. And the reason why we ended up doing this is because we didn't have any product off the shelf to be able to achieve that. So it was pretty much an in-house development to do that. Risk model was initially done in Excel. However, we have moved that model into a database more recently, and we have discontinued this Excel-based model. And reporting system was developed through Power BI, Microsoft Power BI dashboards, which are very interactive and easy to work with for the planning and planning engineers and asset managers. So let's go into the details of the risk model. Now, a simplistic view of the risk model. On your left side, you can see that the age of the asset, inspected condition, which is your visual inspection, and then some other modifiers, such as in our case, if the assets are closer to the coast, or in some cases, our assets are also closer to geothermal reserves, then these two modifiers are used along with the age and the condition. These two modifiers modify the future age of the future health of the asset. Hence, they are used in the future risk or health modeling. However, they are entered along with the health condition and the age in the model to be able to predict the future health. And that goes into developing a health score. Criticality comes from these four areas: the service levels of that asset, public safety element, workplace safety or worker safety, and environmental elements. These four aspects define how critical the asset is. How many customers are connected or being serviced from, what will happen to the public safety if that asset fails, workplace safety if the asset is actually closer to the substation or the fault currents, potential touch or other aspects of the worker safety are involved, or arc flash, any elements of the assets, if the workers have to work on that asset, is that going to impact worker safety at all? Environmental elements, such as if that asset fails, what is going to happen into the environment, bushfires, or the transformer oil leaks into a water stream, or any element of the environmental aspects. So that is the criticality, and then both goes into the asset risk matrix. They calculate the current risk score today. And then we take all the modifiers which come from the health modifiers and any criticality modifiers, and they predict the future risk, controlled and uncontrolled score. And then, so as I explained earlier, controlled score is basically with the intervention, and the uncontrolled score is without the intervention. Is it all going fine? Everybody can hear me okay? And are there any questions so far?
Dr. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, I have a quick question here. because what you are representing is extremely important in for our utilities also. Uh, this whole model that you have shown here in the block diagram, is it for the overall population of the assets, or you are doing this for individual asset like transformer 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you like have all the scores available and then you get the index, or you are talking about 100 transformers and the asset health index is like 30% or 40%? You understand my question?
Every single asset. So
Right.
this model is applied to every single asset. If you have 10,000 transformers, every transformer will have a risk score of its own.
So, and the parameters on the left, like age, inspected condition, and other things, these are having some weightages also as a multiplying factor, or just like you rate them 1 to 10 and then they go into the health score?
Right. So the age and inspected condition is, so basically inspected condition overrides the age. So what happens if it's the same as like, our own bodies. So somebody being 50 years old doesn't mean that that person is going to be weak and old. So if the person has taken care of their body, that person is going to be really good in terms of the overall condition. However, age is a good proxy for the condition. So what we are doing is when we don't have an inspected condition, we take the age and then convert that into an approximate condition. And if we have a condition which comes from the inspected script, then it overrides the age, and then it gets translated into a health score, which I will show how we achieve it in a couple of slides later.
So basically, if you have an asset for which you don't want to deploy any condition assessment technique, like for example, polls, so you can just have a score based on age. That's what you mean.
That's right. So, but what we are doing, we started with the base age model for all the assets. And then we progressively move towards condition assessments based on the criticality of the assets. For example, you have 10,000 poles. So we don't want to inspect 10,000 poles. And we determine that out of 10,000, there are 300 poles which are very, very critical. If those 300 poles fail, that is going to be high risk. So we go out and inspect those 300 poles. And then we put that back into our health model so that we have a much clearer picture how those poles are and what condition they are in and what's the likelihood of them failing.
So, I have one last question here and then you can proceed. So at health score is basically looking at and defining the existing condition of the asset. Whereas criticality means that what happens, what are the consequences if this asset fails to deliver a function. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anyone else has a question.
Yeah, if no one has any question, we can always go back to the question, but I think it will be a lot more clearer if I will proceed with another 5 to 10 more slides. Then some of the questions will already be answered, and then we can have an interactive conversation after that. So it's like yep. So this is the asset risk framework defined by the Electricity Engineers Association. So you can see that it is similar to any risk framework. So asset health index is just like your likelihood of failure in any risk assessment model. So the poorer the asset, the higher the likelihood of the asset being failed, right? And criticality is your consequence of the failure. So the asset criticality as per the EA model is defined from 1 to 4. So they have only come up with 4 categories, C1 to C4. And then health, they have system up to 5, 1 to 5. So health is more granular, 20% step, and then criticality is about 25% step. And then you can see that this is your R1 category of the risk, R2, R3, R4, and R5. So R5 is basically low risk, and R1 is high risk. And criticality, you can understand that C1 is actually highly critical or extreme, C2 is elevated, C3 is typical, C4 is minor. So so that is how EEA defines the asset risk framework. And now if you go into looking at the AHI framework, the asset health indices framework, just a little bit on the asset risk again. So then what we do is basically we convert that framework into something like this for ourselves. And then this is the matrix we produce for each asset class. And then these boxes contain the number of assets which fall in that category. So if you have assets sitting in this category, you know you have a problem. And then if you have assets sitting in somewhere around here, you have a manageable problem. And if they are in this category, you don't need to worry about it, at least for now. So moving on to the health framework, which is, I think, is a more interesting concept. And because it's a hybrid framework from the DNO UK and New Zealand EEA framework, so this requires a couple of minutes of discussion. So EEA asset health index is more linear and has some steps. As you can see, so your asset health starts from very good H5, and then it drops down after a certain period, and then it goes to H4. It drops down further, goes to H3, and then subsequently it goes into the H1, which is the lowest health category, and moves on. But it did not actually define as such that at what point the H5 comes into H4. It provides some high-level guidelines, but not exactly how to translate the overall age, and then how do you basically slice the overall age into H4, H5, and H3 categories. So we had to come up with some some ways to define it through the age model. But you can see there are some guidelines. For example, if asset is as new condition, it's H5. So based on visual inspection, you can determine that whether it's H5. So what we were doing there, basically anything which gets replaced gets H5 score by default, and it stays in H5 as long as it's bright and shiny and it's looking like a new, it is H5. The moment it starts to show some signs of deteriorations, or it is in a serviceable condition, but it starts to show some condition signs, it comes under H4 category. It comes under H3 category if it gets to a point where it starts to accelerate its health condition towards more poorer condition. Then it is in the H3 category. H2 category is basically is getting towards the end of life. However, it's still serviceable, still usable, but you can see that it is actually very poor. And H1 is basically, it is not serviceable anymore. It needs to be replaced and it will fail anytime. However, the DNO framework was actually a non-linear system. So you can see this graph, which is linear to a certain point, and then it gets non-linear after that. So DNO basically defines the health in this manner. And it says that there is going to be a point which is, they are calling it onset of unreliability, OOU, as you can see here. So at the onset of unreliability, they are saying that the health score is going to be 5.5 out of a health system of 1 to 10 plus or up to 15. And they are saying that basically at the onset of unreliability divided by 2, you should basically finish your H5 category. So between the factor of 2 and 5.5, your asset is sitting in the H4 category. And then the moment the score goes over 5.5 up to 6.5, this is your H3 category, where your asset starts to deteriorate faster. And then after 6.5 to 8, your asset is between serviceable life, but it's still poor. And beyond 8, it is under a replacement criteria or is in a condition where replacement is recommended. So that's how we used it. So we use this scoring system from DNO and then overlapped it with the H1 to H5 category of the EEA New Zealand framework. And that's how we came up with a number, health score number between 1 to 15 for each asset type. So moving on, the modifiers are important as well, which are used for, future health. So severe environmental factors, usages or controls, which can deteriorate, cause the assets to deteriorate faster or even slow down. Some modifiers could slow things down. Asset health models has such modifiers embedded in age rate of the asset, so it can slow down or expedite the condition of the asset. And then we have defined some or identified some GIS and non-GIS based modifiers. So GIS based modifiers are already touched on, which are like close to coast, close to geothermal, and non-GIS based could be such as like usage and other controls, etc. So some examples are shown in this next slide. I've picked up, I've removed the score, but I've still kept the categories and measures. For example, corrosion, distance from the coast. So we have defined some distances, and each distance gets a score in this column here. Distance from the geothermal. Similarly, if it is less, it's between 1 to 10 kilometer, it gets a score. It's between 500 meters to 1 kilometer, it gets another score. If it is less than 500 meters, it gets another score. And as you can see, the closer it will get, the modifier is going to get bigger, the future health is going to deteriorate faster. So that is how these modifiers affect the future health. So you may think that the one asset is 50-year life. However, it may actually end or finishes life in 20 years because the conditions around that asset are not so good. And those assets close to geothermal and coastal may actually need a sooner replacement than the actual life cycle of that asset. Other non-GIS related aspects are such as, the acid duty is being used lightly or moderately, or is being used severely, such as controls, such as like, you have enclosed environment or you have early warning systems, you can actually pick it up. There are some other aspects which we are thinking of including in our modifiers as well. Is, excuse me, are some of the ones listed here. Soil conductivity, earth potential rise, accurate drive access, areas of health, high public activity, terrain stability, vegetation encroachments, tip loading, rain rate, probability of snow. All those factors could also be included, which can impact the future health of the assets or can shorten the life of the asset. Now let's move to the.
I have a quick question here. Although you have removed the numbers, maybe because of confidentiality, but I understand that, for example, if the distance is less than 1 kilometer from coast, then this multiplier would be higher, or modifier would be higher.
Yes. This is an exponential scoring system here. So okay, this goes between 1 to 5, and then we have used some higher numbers here and lower numbers here.
But earlier in the slides, you said that these numbers will override the age. But my question is, if a pole is very new, even though it is less than 1 kilometer from the coast, it is going to last longer. So do you really override it, or you just have some weightages and this has higher weightage? You got my question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I'll correct or clarify myself. The condition overrides the age health based health. These modifiers are weighting systems. They don't override anything. What they do is they basically apply a weight to the current health, and then they modify the future health. So for example, if you have a new pole, and then that pole is really close to a geothermal reservoir, so you can't expect that pole to last as long as the other poles which are not closer to the geothermal, correct? So your health will start to deteriorate faster. So that modifies the deterioration rate of that pole.
So Dr. Another question related to this is, do you have a reference age defined for a particular asset in New Zealand utility, like pole, 30 years, 40 years or something? Yes. It's a benchmark? Yes,
we have. So we have been given some benchmarks for each asset type by the regulator, and they are the benchmarks we use for each asset type. For example, a concrete pole we use 70 years. A wooden pole we use about 50 years of asset life.
Okay.
So and so on.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you. The very good questions, and then that definitely suggests to me that uh, you are paying a lot of attention to this
This is my
information.
field also, asset management. Currently, I'm developing asset, but later on we have to manage those assets also.
Absolutely. So thank you for these wonderful questions. Okay, I'll keep going, and then we'll carry on with these interactive conversations. Um, just please let me know how much time do we have. By the way, I wasn't sure about the end time, so because I can keep going. This is an area I can talk about for hours and hours.
Well,
But
usually we have like 1 hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours, including the Q&A. So
right, right.
time is on our
Okay,
own. If
so
people stay here and they are really interested, and you are available because it is already midnight, past midnight in New Zealand. So we are thankful to you. We people are here in a time zone where we can afford more time also because we are learning.
absolutely. So that's fine. I'm flexible. I've allowed at least 1.5 to 2 hours. So not a problem. Because I would like to get the concept across very clearly.
I will give you
Because
one example. हम यूनिवर्सिटी में थे, फन फेयर चल रहा था, तो सारे पॉप म्यूजिक स्टार्स आके बजाना शुरू हो गए, आते गए जाते गए, लेकिन उसके बाद फिर वो 4,000 के मजमे से 40-50 लोग बच गए जिन्होंने उस्ताद अमानत अली खान को लाइव सुना सामने बैठ के. सो जो इंटरेस्टेड होंगे वो तो रहेंगे. सो थैंक यू.
absolutely, because we can have some really good conversation at the end. So let's keep going. So as I said in the earlier slides and showed that there were 4 areas which were actually used in the criticality. So these were the 4 criticality groups: public safety, the harm to the public from their asset; workplace safety is basically means worker safety or staff safety; direct cost; and service levels. So these were the 4 categories we basically used for our purposes. Out of the other 4, we determined. So as you can see that environmental is not here, but we ended up in, including the environmental in our own model, but it wasn't included in the EA criticality framework. So, and then this is how the criticality, uh, you know, metrics or some of the criticality tables look like. As you can see that the public safety had the proximity to public and proximity to public areas. Workplace safety, that was basically arc flash risk. Access difficulty was also important because that is why we have to keep that in mind, that if those assets fail which are difficult to replace, then you need to give them a higher criticality and you need to make sure that you basically manage them very proactively. Service levels, of course, the value of the loss load. That's the concept in New Zealand which is applied, that there has to be an economical measurement of the value of the loss of the load. So for example, you lost 4 customers, but that 4 customers for 2 hours. So what does that mean? That's just, you can translate it into CD, but the loss of the load is the concept of the loss load is basically some guidelines set by the regulator that they have to be translated into an economic cost. So if you lost 4 industrial customers, so you have to translate into a dollar value, that what does that mean to that particular industry, but for the loss of 2 hours of electricity for those 4 customers. And you need to keep that in mind, that if those 4 industrial customers are left without power, then there are other economical losses which you are not including in your calculations, but they have to be considered. Of course, network topology, such as how far it is from the substation, the feeder, and location of the asset, etc. Environmental aspects, of course, spill, gas leakage, etc. Of course, the modifiers here on the right, as you can see, the public safety modifiers are such as like it's an enclosed asset or without enclosure, are there any containments or not? Of course, you have uh, cost criticalities are here, and some of the other modifiers are here. For example, redundancy. You have a redundancy for that particular asset. For example, you might have n-1 scenario for a transformer. So if one transformer fails, the other is there, so it reduces the criticality of the asset. However, if you are in an n situation, that transformer will have a high criticality. Of course, may not have a n-1 security for that asset, but you may have a capability to backfeed to those same customers through a different feeder. So that reduces the criticality of some of the those sets or assets involved. Of course, if you have peak shaving capabilities such as like ripple control. So I don't know whether most of the audience are aware of this. We have a system called ripple control. It sends a signal and switches off all the hot water cylinders which are operating on electricity. We have a large portion of hot water cylinders. We call geysers in Pakistan. They are controlled. They are electrical and they are controlled by these ripple signals. So that's a measure to control the peak demand or peak shape. Do you have a mobile generator? Do you have critical spares? For example, you may have a large transformers, which is hard to replace. The lead time might be 12 months, 10 months, but you may have a spare. So if you have a spare, that definitely reduces the criticality of that asset and protection systems and so on. So uh, how do you actually, define which criticality to be assigned to what asset and where do you start? So to be able to do that, we did some statistical analysis and we understood where are most of our assets sitting. And then when we processed all those assets through uh, through that criticality model, we found out that many assets were actually sitting in a position which gives us a score of 2.75. And if that gets multiplied by a health score of 5.5, which is the onset of unreliability, it can be defined as a high priority asset or riskier asset. So what we did, we basically took out all these assets above this halfway or more than halfway through in the criticality score, multiplied them with the onset of unreliability score, which is 5.5. And then these two were the R1 and R2 categories risks. R1 and R2 risk category assets. And then some of them will be R1. For the asset health failure modes we use and how did we actually develop those objective scripts. So what we did, basically we engaged someone who was really an expert in the condition assessment, especially with the primary assets or poles and wires and all of that. And then we invited all of our asset inspectors, engineers and everyone, and with the consultant we spent months and months and did lots of workshops and extracted all the knowledge and information out of those inspectors, and then predefined all the failure modes of those assets, and then developed a mathematical model which would give us a score from 1 to 15 as I defined earlier. What could those failure modes include? Basically any signs of the overload, signs of flashover, signs of impacts, corrosion, obstruction or access issues, any leakages or any design issues, etc. So for example, if you see a pole, concrete is chipping away, you can see the structure, the metal, the metallic structure in the concrete pole. Definitely you have a problem. Something could be like in the transformer, you see the oil is leaking, you have a problem. Of course, you have flashover signs, you have a problem. Some the metallic casing of the ring main units, and you see big signs of corrosions and big holes and exposure to the public. you have a problem. So you need to define all of those potential failure modes and then assign them a weighting. And that's what we did. We identified each and every failure mode for each asset type and then gave them a scoring system. That, okay, if you find these things, these are non-negotiables, they will immediately give you a H1 score. If you find these signs, you have H2 or H3 and then so on. For example, like if you talk about a car, for example, if you have a wiper or a seat belt not working in a car, the car is still usable. So of course, it's not going to get an H1 score. You're likely to get an H4 or H3. However, if you have a flat tire or your engine is not, operational, or your gearbox is not working, your transmission has failed, your car is not usable, it's not serviceable. So definitely that gets an H1 score. So that's the same process we use to basically define those scoring systems. So what we ended up finding out after that if we apply, that health criteria, most of our assets, what we saw, were in the H5, H4, and H3 category. And some of the assets were sitting under H1 and H2 category, which were actually very poor. And then using those modifiers I explained earlier, if we do not invest anything, then you can see that there's a large portion of the assets after 10 years, they will be in a very poor condition. And that requires intervention. So historically, we were spending a lot of cash to get rid of these. However, in the risk-based system, you don't have to get rid of all of them unless they are actually important or critical. So moving on with the modifiers, what the modifiers do, I already explained, but we will probably define it a bit better. Assets having modifiers applied to their aging rate are likely to age faster, thus require replacement sooner. Health model will forecast their health at the end of the 10-year planning period and give them a future health score and a new future age index. The future health score multiplied by criticality gives their future risk score, which is already defined earlier as well. So what were the key challenges? So the first challenge was that, of course, how do you, you need to come up with an agreed list of failure modes for each asset type. And as I explained, it took us months and months to be able to agree on those things. It needed a lot of expert knowledge, consultants, staff, engineers, inspectors to sit together, workshop, develop a list, review it, agree on it, and then use those in the weighting system and mathematical model to come up with an objectivity-based health script. Of course, systematic health inspection with objective questionnaire was to be developed, and that was done mathematically, was tested, validated, and we had to go through a lot of validation. Of course, consistency for results. And that required a lot of training and feedback and going back and fixing the health model and retraining the inspectors. It took us months to achieve the same outcome from all the same inspectors, and consistency from the script itself as well. The integration was also another challenge. That, of course, you're collecting a lot of data in the iPads, a lot of data in that app. How does that flow automatically into your asset management system? So that was a computational challenge, and we had to engage some developers and in-house development capability to be able to achieve that, so that as soon as the inspector inspects the script, an asset, that flows back into the system, it gets automatically calculated and turned into a health score. It goes and updates the risk model. So that is what was saving us a lot of time. Otherwise, if you have to go through that manual process of getting that score into some system and then updated, and then if it takes time, then the benefits you are likely to get from the system are partly lost. Definitely, how do you operationalize the criticality framework? So you had to predefine all of those criticalities, their scoring system and everything, and then run some geospatial scripts in your GIS system to define those criticalities and develop a criticality scoring system in the GIS. And that was being integrated into our asset management system to be able to calculate the risk. Of course, accuracy of the future risk. The modifiers could be very sensitive. So you have to, make sure that you are not, applying the modifiers too strongly or too lightly, that they start to give you some really wrong signals. If you apply modifiers too strongly, you may be predicting that the assets are going to die or fail in next 5 years. However, in reality, it may not be the case. And you will have to continue to improve the weighting of those modifiers to be able to accurately forecast the future health, because there's no way you can predict it 100% accurately. However, you need to have a system which learns itself over the period and then gets better. And definitely you need to remove all these mathematical sensitivities from the model and all the factors which impact the model disproportionately in any manner. And you have to apply that sensitivity check on each of the mathematical model. So in summary, basically what we learned was that the model was most sensitive to criticality, and then it was followed by the health, because criticality was quite blunt. It was quite, a step a change, and then it had a larger impact. So we had to apply criticality quite carefully, and it required a lot of statistical and mathematical analysis before you could conclude that what weightings you're going to apply, and then how you're going to apply the weightings from the modifiers. Definitely high confidence on criticality measures confidence around health is improving as we are collecting more and more data, and we have been collecting the data for past couple of years. So definitely our risk model is getting better. The age modifiers generally were limited to the 10-year, which was the planning period for us, but we have now recently expanded that to much longer period, up to over 30 to 50 years, to be able to give confidence to the board that whatever strategy we are applying today for the 10-year life cycle of the asset management is actually going to be the most suitable approach for the whole life cycle of the asset, which could be 50 year, 40 year. Sometimes because you may go and suggest, okay, we need to invest $10 million on this particular asset type. However, you realize that you're over investing. And then it might be the case that you are over investing just to catch up. But after 10 years, you have a plan to drop to 5 million or lesser, because you will be, you will have the risk of that particular asset type under control. So we have to develop those 30, 50 year risks charts to demonstrate to the board that yes, we are going to overinvest in these assets. We're going to get on top of the risk. However, we're going to reduce our investment profile after 20 years or after 30 years. That will, start to keep us on top of the risk. And definitely criticality analysis, which automatically considers the service levels, and then hence it automatically covers for the reliability aspects as well. So we don't need to do any additional measures that, okay, the Irfan Sahab or Mer Sahab, we can open the forum for questions or discussion points. If you can
sure.
still hear me.
If anyone has any question, please come up. अगर कोई सवाल नहीं पूछेगा तो फिर मैं पूछना शुरू करूं. Ali, you are from Siemens, Germany, you told me. So you have any question, or you can, if you want to add anything, please go ahead.
Hello, Irfan Sahab, can I ask question? Jalees बात कर रहा हूँ.
जी, sure, Jalees. Stage is all yours.
ये डॉक्टर साहब, मैं जलीस बात कर रहा हूँ, वर्किंग फॉर केयर इलेक्ट्रिक. आपकी प्रेजेंटेशन काफ़ी थॉट प्रोवोकिंग और बड़ी यूजफुल रही, माशाल्लाह. मुझे एक क्वेश्चन ये था कि आपका जो सारा जो मॉडल है वो डिपेंड कर रहा है कि इंस्पेक्टर पे, इंस्पेक्टर का मेन रोल है, कुछ आपके ऐसे एसेट्स होंगे जो एक्सीडेंटली डैमेज हो जाएं, तो आपका कोई ये है कि उसमें ऑनलाइन कोई ट्रांसफार्मर है, उसकी पीडी मॉनिटरिंग है या उसकी डीजीए है, ऑनलाइन करते हैं, वो भी इसमें इनकॉर्पोरेट करते हैं, या टोटली आप एक इंस्पेक्शन की उस पर चल रहे हैं?
नहीं, वो है डेफिनेटली मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द एसेट्स आर विजुअल बिकॉज ऑफ द नेचर ऑफ द एसेट्स. जो सबस्टेशन के ट्रांसफार्मर्स हैं या पावर ट्रांसफार्मर्स हैं, तो उनकी जो कंडीशन मॉनिटरिंग है वो गोज इनटू द मॉडल. बट देयर आर ओनली फ्यू ऑफ देम. अगर हम स्केल देखेंगे तो वो शायद 2-3% होंगे. 95%, 97% जो एसेट्स हैं जो हमारे प्राइमरी डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सिस्टम में, वो ज्यादातर विजुअल पे ही रहते हैं. जैसे कि आपके क्रॉस आर्म्स हैं, रेगुलेटर्स हैं, कंडक्टर है, पोल्स हैं, उसमें ऐसा किसी तरह की कंडीशन मॉनिटरिंग की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती.
Acha, Dr. Sir, let me add something here. I briefly worked for Alstom Grid in Qatar, and we were providing the asset health indexing services to Kaharma, Qatar State Electricity. And that project was also for distribution assets. So this is also true, while 70% of the data collected is through visual inspections. But in that particular contract, because they were preparing for the World Cup, which is, I think, happening this year, so they had some offline measurements also taken, like they were doing DGAs for the distribution key or critical. Based on the criticality analysis, they were doing some DGAs, they were doing thermography of the switchgear assets, and partial discharge surveys through UHF, RFI, or TUV, or HFCT. So you can add on these things depending upon the criticality. The idea of, I think, this talk was how to develop an asset health criticality index, or a criticality index, which is covered here. But you can add on online monitoring also, and you will have those condition monitoring parameters also taken into account into this. I think there is a very good white paper, Jalees, which you would like to read from IEC website. If you go to IEC website, there is a white paper given on IEC asset management. So maybe you would like to download it and look into it. Moreover, a PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, also has published a sort of white paper in which they have taken into account all these online monitoring that you mentioned. But yes, they are critical. Dr. Saab here is talking specifically about the distribution assets. When you go to transmission assets, your power transformers become big and bigger and bigger, and they become very critical because they form the backbone of your utility system. Distributions are more towards the consumer end, and the big money lies probably in the transmission or generation, maybe.
जी, absolutely. I think you have summed it up very well. देखिए, it all goes back to the banks for the bucks. आप इसमें कंडीशन मॉनिटरिंग और तमाम एस्पेक्ट्स ऐड कर लें चाहे तो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन एसेट्स की. हमारी असेसमेंट ये थी कि डजंट ऐड अ लॉट ऑफ वैल्यू. विजुअल इंस्पेक्शन गिव्स यू प्रीटी मच अ गुड प्रॉक्सी, and then it is mostly suitable to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve for a pole. For example, पोल में भी हम बहुत सारी टेस्टिंग्स कर सकते हैं. अब वुडन पोल है तो हम उसको भी टेस्ट कर सकते हैं, उसकी स्ट्रेंथ और वो. लेकिन हमारी असेसमेंट ये रही कि वो इतनी वैल्यूएबल नहीं होती. अगर हम 8,000 10,000 पोल्स की जो है वो उसकी स्ट्रेंथ असेसमेंट करवा लें या कंडक्टर असेसमेंट करवाएं, तो उसमें जो कॉस्ट और एफर्ट इन्वॉल्व होती है वो उसको हम रिकवर नहीं कर सकते. तो उसमें हम फिर ये करते हैं कि we rely on the visual, and then we have some element of control in form of reactive maintenance or defect management, and we allow for certain assets to fail, we allow certain assets to run to fail, and that is how we optimize.
Ali from Siemens, Germany, inka question hai. Thank you, Dr. Saab, for the wonderful lecture. Can you please throw some light on the data collection methods for assets current condition? Is it via manual inspection you do, or you have sensors? So I think you have already answered that. And collect data via historian or data lake. What is the level of edge technology implementation for this in New Zealand?
Right. Okay. 2-3 मेरे ख्याल में सवाल है इसमें, तो मैं वो बहुत ही सिंपल और ब्रीफ है. तो पहले तो ये कि वो हम लोग मैनुअल पहले करते थे, अब मैनुअल नहीं करते. तो दैट इज डन थ्रू द ऐप एंड थ्रू मोबिलिटी एप्स ऑन iPads. So it's all digital and it's all automated through those scripts I talked about. Second ये है कि it all goes back into the system, which is our ellipse system, and it goes through a sort of intermediary system, which is a database. And then it goes into multiple systems, into GIS and into LAPS, and it goes to a risk model. So there is a lot of data integration and some computational involved in this whole process, because that was the whole idea of developing this automated system, to be able to have all of this flowing through every system automatically. The moment inspector submits the score, it goes into every system and it does the job. So the Historian is an off-the-shelf solution. We developed our own in-house SQL, data warehouses to complete that integration, because I also manage the ICT. So that is another area which I look after. So we had a lot of internal in-house capability to achieve all of this by ourselves.
उमैर, आप मुझे स्क्रीन शेयरिंग मोड अलाउ करेंगे?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, I'm Mohsin. Excuse me.
जी मोहसिन, हम आपको सुन सकते हैं, बट आई थिंक देयर यू हैव अ नॉइजी चैनल और इंटरनेट वीक है, बट वी कैन हियर यू.
Yeah, Irfan bhai, I do have a question. I am actually from Affinity ना, तो I've been doing several things on machine learning. Recently, what I've been observing is कि मेरा Criticality का भी experience है. So I've been observing कि asset management के अंदर from both on the offline और online channels, we deployed a technique by which we could get the data to fetch the data. अब इसके लिए GIS या SCADA यूज होता है, या फिर इंस्ट्रूमेंटेशन के थ्रू जो है ना मशीन की मॉडलिंग कर सकते हैं. बट व्हाट वी कुड डू इज के इट्स अ थॉट फॉर समथिंग फॉर द फ्यूचर, कि हम मशीन्स की रियल टाइम जो है ना इनकी मॉनिटरिंग कर सकते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल ये कि अब जैसे एक ट्रैफो है, पावर ट्रैफो है, इफ इट्स ऑन अ ONAP और समथिंग ऑफ अदर चैनल, तो इसकी सर्कुलेशन के अंदर, इसकी वाइंडिंग के अंदर क्या इम्पैक्ट आ रहा है, इसकी ग्रेडेशन क्या हो रही है, इसकी ऑयल की डिकम्पोजिशन रेट क्या है, इसकी टर्न रेशियो क्या है, फॉल्ट रेशियो क्या है, ये सारी चीजें मॉनिटर करने के लिए हम एक फिजिकल पैरामीटर क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. वो है करंट का फेजर मेजरमेंट. क्योंकि करंट जो है वो एक फेजर मेजरमेंट का एक पैरामीटर है. उसके थ्रू हम किसी भी इंस्टेंस पे उसकी वैल्यू के थ्रू हम पूरी चीज विजुअलाइज कर सकते हैं. ये कॉन्सेप्ट है मशीन लर्निंग में. इट्स नोन एज परसेप्ट्रॉन, where you define a spatial coordinate into y and x coordinates, and y is it's basically defined as y equals to theta naught plus theta naught x. So इसमें क्या होता है, इसमें होता ये है कि किसी भी पॉइंट के ऊपर आप एक 3D फेजर मेजरमेंट कर सकते हैं, और वो फेजर मेजरमेंट के थ्रू आप किसी भी चीज की मॉडलिंग कर सकते हैं. अब अगर कोई जैसे इसकी इसकी रियलाइजेशन ये है कि आप अगर एक पावर ट्रैफो आपने लगाया हुआ है, पावर ट्रैफो के अंदर आपको एक फॉल्ट आता है जो कि डिस्टेंस एक डिस्टेंस के ऊपर रिले ऑपरेट करती है. अब वो डिस्टेंस हमें अननोन है, तो डिस्टेंस दूर है, तो उसके वजह से रिले ऑपरेट नहीं कर रही. तो हम क्या करते हैं कि डिफरेंशियल ट्रांसफार्मर है वो ऑपरेट नहीं हो रहा. तो अगर हम इसमें ये करें कि किसी तरीके से हम क्योंकि वो एंगल 45 से 90 0 से 45 तक होता है, तो उसमें हम क्या कर सकते हैं, हम ये कर सकते हैं कि हम जो है ना उसकी जो डिस्टेंस रिले की जो आउटपुट है उसको डिफरेंशियल रिले के इनपुट पे देंगे अगर, तो उसकी पर यूनिट फेजर मेजरमेंट के थ्रू जो है ना इसकी कैलकुलेशन हो जाएगी. तो इससे ये होता है कि इंटरन फॉल्ट्स भी कैलकुलेट होंगे, और कहाँ पे अगर फॉल्ट जो है ना आपके सेकेंडरी साइड पे फॉल्ट आ रहा है या प्राइमरी साइड पे आ रहा है, तो वो फौरन से पिन पॉइंट हो जाएगा. फिर कोई विजुअलाइजेशन मीडिया के थ्रू जो भी 3D एनालिसिस कर सकता हो, उसके थ्रू जो है ना इसकी रियल टाइम जो है ना विजुअलाइजेशन हो सकती है. आई वाज जस्ट एडिंग टू इट. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट द प्रेजेंटेशन वाज रियली फैंटास्टिक और काफी अच्छी लर्निंग थी, एंड डॉक्टर साहब हैज रियली गुड नॉलेज अबाउट इट.
अच्छा मोहसिन, मैं जस्ट एक चीज ऐड कर दूं. अभी हम ब्रॉडर कॉन्सेप्ट की बात कर रहे हैं, जहां पर हम एसेट हेल्थ क्रिटिकलिटी इंडेक्स को डेवलप करेंगे. जब डेवलप करेंगे तो कुछ एसेट्स जो होंगे वो H2 में फॉल करेंगे, कुछ H3 में फॉल करेंगे, एंड यू विल हैव द प्रिसाइज डाटा अवेलेबल. द डाटा विल बी अवेलेबल टू द मैनेजमेंट ऑन विच काइंड ऑफ एसेट्स जो कि अब इस कंडीशन में आ गए हैं उस पर ऑनलाइन मॉनिटरिंग की जरूरत है. अगर रिप्लेसमेंट रिफर्बिशमेंट के अलावा ये भी तो हो सकता है ना कि यू कैन रन देम till a time where you get money or you get time to actually replace those or repair those. So अभी पहली स्टेज यही है कि हम एसेट हेल्थ क्रिटिकलिटी इंडेक्स को डेवलप कर लें, बट यू आर टॉकिंग इज बेसिकली मेंटेनेंस साइड ऑफ इट, मेंटेनेबिलिटी, एंड ऑफ कोर्स थिंग्स विल गो डाउन that path later on. एक चीज बड़ी पहले सैयद इरफान मुस्तफा ने डिफाइन कर दी थी कि asset management is a top down approach. Management की ownership है, and it is basically aligning the objectives of the management or the financial functions into the overall asset management philosophy of the company. So ये broader framework है. इस framework के अंदर आप नीचे जाते जाएंगे, आप condition monitoring technologies use करें, आप SMEs को hire करें, subject matter experts को, वो आपको चीजें develop करके देंगे, और आप फिर वो जो population का जो certain portion है उसके ऊपर ये सब कुछ अप्लाई करें. You don't go and apply like आपके पास 10,000 ट्रांसफार्मर है, 10,000 पे ऑनलाइन मॉनिटरिंग की जरूरत नहीं होगी. Maybe you can do all this, and by this exercise you are reduced to like 100, 200 or 300 transformers.
Absolutely, because we don't have unlimited budgets. So that's why, I mean, I'm talking being an executive, because I control all the budget. So I have to spend that money very, very carefully. That how do I spend that and where do I need to spend that? So आपने इसको बहुत अच्छी तरीके से डिफाइन किया है कि जहाँ कंडीशन मॉनिटरिंग जो है या ऑनलाइन कंडीशन मॉनिटरिंग जो है या ऑनलाइन मॉनिटरिंग जो है, ये दैट इज अनदर मॉडिफायर. तो अगर आप H2 कंडीशन में चले गए हैं, H1 में चले गए हैं, यू वांट टू स्टिल कैरी ऑन, so definitely that modifier or online monitoring is actually helping you to take some quick and reactive measures when the asset fails. और बाकी जो मोहसिन साहब बात कर रहे थे, I understand what you're saying. इसके ऊपर हम बहुत सारे, इसमें फिर किसी और दिन बात करेंगे. हम रियल टाइम जो है वो फॉल्ट एनालिसिस, फॉल्ट लोकेशन आइडेंटिफिकेशन, प्लस इवन यू नो सेल्फ हीलिंग नेटवर्क्स, इसके ऊपर भी हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं, जिसमें आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस या सम फॉर्म ऑफ लॉजिक्स और डीप लर्निंग को यूज कर रहे हैं. तो मे बी फॉर अनदर टाइम.
हाँ, और इसमें हम मोहसिन की भी जो नॉलेज है उसको यूटिलाइज करेंगे. मोहसिन ने मेरे से राब्ता किया था, इन्होंने अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन भी शेयर की है. सो अभी पहला तो मेरा टारगेट यही है कि हम लोग जो एक्सपर्ट्स डॉक्टर वकार की तरह मतलब बहुत एडवांस किस्म के नेटवर्क्स यूटिलिटीज को मैनेज कर रहे हैं, उनके एक्सपीरियंस से कुछ लर्न कर सकें. एंड दिस डज नॉट स्टॉप हियर. आप क्वेश्चन पूछें, अगर अभी ज़हन में नहीं आता तो दोबारा पूछ लें, हमसे राब्ता करें. डॉक्टर साहब लिंक्डइन पे मौजूद हैं, माशाल्लाह काफ़ी एक्टिव हैं, सीग्रे के मेंबर हैं. एंड इफ यू पीपल डोंट नो अबाउट सीग्रे, इट्स अबाउट टाइम यू स्टार्ट नोइंग अबाउट इट. ठीक है, आई हैव बीन मेंबर एवर सिंस आई केम इन कॉन्टैक्ट विद डॉक्टर वकार. हमारी कोशिश तो थी उस वक्त कि हम पाकिस्तान का चैप्टर भी शुरू करते, बट वो भी नहीं हुआ. इंशाल्लाह मेंबर बनेंगे तो वो भी कर लेंगे. मैंने वैसे डीएनओ का शेयर किया था जो डॉक्यूमेंट था, नेटवर्क एसेट इंडाइसेस, जो डॉक्टर साहब जिसका जिक्र कर रहे थे, यूके का ऑफ जेम का जो डॉक्यूमेंट है, कि आप लोग उसे पढ़ सकें. जी काशिफ, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? जी 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 डॉक्टर.
काफी सारे चैट में आए हुए हैं. आई थिंक यू कैरी ऑन, देन वी विल पिक इट अप आफ्टर दैट.
जी जी, आई एम डन. आई वाज जस्ट आस्किंग अबाउट द क्वेश्चंस. आप पिक कर लें क्वेश्चन.
क्वेश्चन है अली जुल्फी कह रहे हैं, थैंक यू डॉक्टर साहब फॉर द वंडरफुल लेक्चर, कैन यू प्लीज थ्रो सम लाइट ऑन द डेटा कलेक्शन मेथड फॉर एसेट.
ये आंसर कर दिया,
ये आपने कवर कर लिया. एंड देन मियां आसिम अजीज, very useful knowledge imparted by Dr. Waqar. I hope this can inspire discourse with like less course to improve their performance before long. Yep, I hope so. That I think we are using some of these high-level techniques to optimize our spend on each asset class. Is it possible we can clone this health index system in discourse of Pakistan? Yeah, absolutely. This is not a very complicated system, but I think it requires some high-level thinking and approach to how do we manage. However, in Pakistan, you have a very different situation. You have large populations and you have very limited budgets. So you need almost, you definitely need these systems, because you don't have the ability to either inspect everything or you don't have ability to replace everything in a timely manner. In a lot of discourse in Pakistan, most of the assets are actually being replaced reactively. So proactive replacement is very limited. And that is at least my understanding. However, I think this model or similar model can be used to optimize how we basically spend our capital spend or operational spend on these asset classes. Recording के बारे में पूछा है अली जुल्फी साहब ने. Would that be available? I think Irfan Sahab, you can probably answer that question.
श्योर. मैं रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा था लेकिन बीच में मैं ही डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया, बट जितनी भी मेरे पास अवेलेबल, आई थिंक 80-90% इज अवेलेबल. आई विल शेयर विद पीपल विद डॉक्टर साहब परमिशन. अच्छा डॉक्टर साहब, एक मुख्तसरन एक स्क्रीन शेयर करना चाह रहा हूँ. If I'm allowed to, उमर मैं शेयर नहीं कर पा रहा स्क्रीन, क्या प्रॉब्लम है? Hello, Umair, are you there?
There is a mute.
Sir, I have made you a host now. Now you can share.
कैसे? अभी डॉक्टर साहब की स्क्रीन आ रही? अच्छा, मैंने बटन दबाया. ओके. मैं रिसेंटली आई केम अक्रॉस अ वेरी नाइस बुक. ये जो खातून आप देख रहे हैं, शी इज डॉक्टर लीना बर्टलिंग. शी हैज रिटन दिस बुक व्हिच इज कॉल्ड, ये आप सबको नजर आ रही है या नहीं, या सिर्फ मैं ही देख पा रहा हूँ?
जी जी आ रही.
मैं डॉक्टर साहबा की बात नहीं कर रहा, बुक की बात कर रहा हूँ. सो दिस इज अ बुक, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एसेट मैनेजमेंट विद पावर सिस्टम एप्लीकेशंस. इट्स अ वेरी नाइस बुक, इट्स वर्थ रीडिंग. और ये बेसिकली उस जगह पर है जहां पर के इसने पर्टिकुलर एसेट्स को मॉडल किया उसकी असेसमेंट के लिए. एंड शी हैज कवर्ड बेसिकली सम पार्ट ऑफ ट्रांसफार्मर्स, केबल्स, ट्रांसमिशन लाइंस, सम ऑफ द की एसेट्स. One hell of a book. She has been working with some utility companies developing all these indices. So I would strongly recommend reading this. मेरी आदत है रीड करने की, इसलिए मैं आप लोगों को गलत रास्ते पे चला दूंगा. So let me stop this.
Lina, I definitely will check it out.
मैंने ली थी ये एक जमाने में, Amazon से PDF परचेज किया था, वही पढ़ा हुआ है. But it's very good book. So डॉक्टर साहब, मेरे ख्याल है लोगों की और क्वेश्चंस तो नहीं है. मेरे इस पे बहुत से क्वेश्चन हो सकते हैं. मैंने जो प्रोजेक्ट किया था, एट द एंड ऑफ द डे जो कतर की यूटिलिटी थी, क्योंकि उमैर का क्वेश्चन है कि किस बजट की बात कर रहे हैं. दैट प्रोजेक्ट फॉर द डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन एसेट्स ऑफ अ स्मॉल कंट्री लाइक कतर, size is very small, so geographical area is very small. You have very, lesser area to cover. New Zealand, I'm not sure whether it is big enough or not. But countries like Singapore, Qatar, they do have power generation capability more than Pakistan. Their per capita usage is, I think, 5-6 times more than, or maybe 10 times more than Pakistan. So हम उसमें तो compare नहीं कर सकते. But that project was around $10 million. It was a 2 to 3 years project. बट उसका बेनिफिट क्या हुआ? उसका बेनिफिट ये हुआ कि उनके जो रिलायबिलिटी इंडाइसेस थे, जो सैफी सैडी वगैरह इंटरप्शंस के जो थी चीजें, वो सिग्निफिकेंटली इंप्रूव हो गई. इफ दीज आर लाइक 60-70%, दे अचीव्ड बेंचमार्क्स ऑफ 96, 97, 99% रिलायबिलिटीज. सो मनी अल्टीमेटली पेज ऑफ. जो प्रॉब्लम आ रही थी, ट्रांसफार्मर्स जल रहे थे, उसकी कॉस्ट 2-3 साल में बहुत ज्यादा थी, और इंटरप्शंस बहुत एक्सपेंसिव हैं ऐसे कंट्रीज में, as I said, like Qatar, Singapore, Dubai, Bahrain, और इस तरह के कंट्रीज लाइक ऑस्ट्रेलिया, न्यूजीलैंड, USA. You can't actually think living without power for 1 hour or 2 hours. ये तो पाकिस्तान की बदकिस्मती है कि हम लोग अभी इन चीजों को, एंड टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट, किसी को बुरा लगे, मैंने तो MD NTDC साहब को भी कहा था कि आप अपनी टीम को यहाँ पर बुलाएं, बेशक 2-4 लोग ही बुलाएं, बस कराची इलेक्ट्रिक के लोग बैठे हैं, 3-4 लोग तो मुझे नजर आ रहे हैं, और ये काबिल लोग हैं. जलीस ने आगे जाके बड़ी सीनियर पोजीशंस लेनी है. मालिक दीनो साहब यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं, ही रिटायर्ड एज अ जनरल मैनेजर प्रोबेबली. और भी कुछ साथी मेरे नजर आ रहे हैं मुझे यहाँ पर बैठे हुए, जो अभी तक बैठे हैं. बट NTDC का जो रिस्पॉन्स था, दैट वाज एक्चुअली प्रीटी पैथेटिक. बहरहाल हम देखेंगे, हम इस एफर्ट को छोड़ेंगे नहीं. मैंने जितना भी पहले जो पिछला सेशन किया था, उससे पहले एक दफा इनके पास जाके किए थे, मैं इनसे शेयर करता रहता हूँ. सो ड्रॉप बाय ड्रॉप मेरा ख्याल है ये पत्थर भी पिघलेंगे. कराची इलेक्ट्रिक इज ऑन द पाथ ऑफ बिकमिंग अ बेटर यूटिलिटी. नॉन परफॉर्मेंस की वजह से लोग परेशान तो होते हैं, लेकिन जो सिस्टम्स कराची इलेक्ट्रिक में डेवलप हो रहे हैं, जिस तरह की टीम डेवलप हो रही है, आगे चल के इन द लॉन्गर रन ये ठीक हो जाएगी. जब पुराने डायरेक्टर्स हजरात जो हैं वो नए लोगों की बात सुनेंगे, इस तरह की चीजों में पार्टिसिपेट करेंगे. उन्होंने लर्निंग इंस्टीट्यूट बनाया. आई वुड होप कि डॉक्टर साहब को कभी बुलाएं वहां पर, जलीस कोशिश करें तो डॉक्टर साहब को कभी उधर बुलाएं ट्रेनिंग के लिए. मैं गया हूँ 2-4 मरतबा ट्रांसफार्मर्स के लिए, स्पेशली सब्जेक्ट मैटर एक्सपर्ट के तौर पे. सो इम्प्रूवमेंट होगी इंशाल्लाह. सो आई थैंक एवरीवन हु स्टेड हियर. और अगर किसी का कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है, देन वी विल एंड दिस एंड आई विल शेयर एवरीथिंग. थैंक यू जलीस फॉर.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर.
वालेकुम सलाम. जी अदनान.
सर अदनान फारूकी, ऑरेंज लाइन मेट्रो ट्रेन लाहौर में काम कर रहा हूँ, इस वक्त ट्रैक्शन इंजीनियर. सर अभी हमने जितने भी सिस्टम डिजाइन बात की है, हमने ऑप्टिमाइज करना होता है सिस्टम को, लेकिन एक यहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम जो स्टिल मैं देख रहा हूँ, 2.5 years हो गए हैं, कि यहाँ पे एक चाइनीज स्टैंडर्ड्स है, जैसे कि आपने बताया कि पाकिस्तान की बदकिस्मती है, एनटीडीसी के बहुत सारे लोग हैं जो कोऑपरेट नहीं कर होते, तो यहाँ पर भी ऐसी है, कोऑपरेशन नहीं हो पा रही। और आपने इरफान साहब, आपने जो यम्बो 2 में काम किया था मराफिक में, मैं भी वहीं पे था, तो वहाँ आपने सऊदीज की बिहेवियर को भी चेक किया था। तो क्या हम इस बिहेवियर को इस एसेट मैनेजमेंट के अंदर इंक्लूड कर सकते हैं?
अच्छा, आपने जो इसका, मैं दूसरे पार्ट की तरफ पहले आता हूँ, जो आपने यम्बू 2 के एक्सपीरियंस की बात की, सो वहां पे क्या बिहेवियर था? और आज 10 साल बाद आई एम इन सऊदी अरेबिया, ठीक है, वहां पर मेरे पास, मुझे नहीं पता कि आप कौन से प्रोजेक्ट पे थे, आई वाज एट दी फर्स्ट एट द पावर प्लांट, और उसके बाद मुझे उन्होंने डिसैलिनेशन यूनिट पे कर दिया था। तो
सर
डिसैलिनेशन,
मैं दोनों में था, मैं हनवा में था एक्चुअली।
अच्छा, उधर एक लड़का था अहमद अल शेख, डिसैलिनेशन प्लांट पे, उसको मैंने मेंटोर किया। उसके अंदर विल थी, वो सीखना चाहता था, डॉक्टर साहब जैसे लोगों से बातचीत करता था, प्रेजेंटेशंस लेता था, वेबिनार अटेंड लेता। He is currently CEO of a 300 megawatt power plant with only 12 years of experience. And because of him, I am currently the project director for a 2.6 gigawatt, $1.5 billion project in Saudi Arabia. So things have changed. अगर यहाँ चेंज हो सकती हैं जहाँ पे लोग काम ही नहीं करना चाहते थे, so I think Pakistan has got talent. हमें सिर्फ उस टैलेंट के अंदर आग लगानी है। मैं ये काम, ये डॉक्टर साहब को लेके आए हैं यहाँ पर, तो हम सिर्फ इसलिए कर रहे हैं कि कहीं ना कहीं 2, 4, 5, 6 जो है वो दिए जल जाएं। आई वुड एक्सपेक्ट यू पीपल जो भी यहाँ पर हैं कि ये आगे से आगे पैगाम पहुंचाएं। पाकिस्तान ने, हम वैसे कहें जी पाकिस्तान ये नहीं है वो नहीं है, लेकिन जो कुछ भी है पाकिस्तान की वजह से ही है ना। सो वी हैव टू रिटर्न थिंग्स बैक टू आवर कंट्री। मेरी तो यही एफर्ट है यार, मुझे से कोई पैसा नहीं मिल रहा, मेरा कोई यूट्यूब चैनल नहीं है, मुझे कोई पैसा नहीं मिलता। अभी मुझे कंपनी से परमिशन लेनी पड़ेगी नेक्स्ट सेशंस करने के लिए। बट आपकी बात का जवाब ये है कि ये एटीट्यूड होने चाहिए। बल्कि जब आप ओवरऑल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस की बात करते हैं, ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल बिहेवियर के सब्जेक्ट्स पढ़ते हैं, तो पीपल आर द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग। आप रिलायबिलिटी को पढ़ेंगे, वो पीपल एंड प्रोसेसेस की बात करते हैं, ठीक है, पूरे पूरे स्टैंडर्ड्स मौजूद हैं, पीपल आर इंपॉर्टेंट। उनकी एटीट्यूड चेंज भी तो हमने ही करनी है ना। वी आर द पीपल, we are the people who are part of all these organizations. If we don't change, then who will change us? So पहला सवाल मैं भूल गया।
नहीं, वो इन्होंने पीपल और चाइनीज स्टैंडर्ड की बात की थी, और वो पीपल और बिहेवियर की बात की थी। वो बेसिकली इरफान साहब, आई थिंक वो 55,001 के अंदर उन्होंने कवर किया होगा उस्मान साहब ने। जो 55,001 या किसी भी स्टैंडर्ड की जो सोल होती है या जो उसकी फाउंडेशन होती है, उसमें जो लीडरशिप का कमिटमेंट है वो बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है। तो इट ऑल स्टार्ट्स फ्रॉम द टॉप। जब तक कि टॉप मैनेजमेंट की कमिटमेंट नहीं होगी कि आपने वो जो है अपनी प्रैक्टिसेस को, एसेट मैनेजमेंट की, या उसको जो आपके जो प्रोसेसेस हैं, सिस्टम्स हैं, इंक्लूडिंग पीपल एंड द कल्चर, उसको चेंज नहीं करना चाहते, तो वो कुछ नहीं होगा। एसेट मैनेजमेंट का जो स्टैंडर्ड 55,001 है, उसकी भी फाउंडेशन वही है। लीडरशिप का जो कमिटमेंट है वो बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है, एंड देन दैट फ्लोज डाउन, और वो वहां से नीचे की तरफ आता है। होता क्या है, जो मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल बताता हूँ। सबसे बड़ा जो चैलेंज आता है एसेट मैनेजमेंट की, आपको जब कल्चर चेंज करने की तरफ आप जाते हैं, ये जो हमने अचीव किया है, ये इट वाज नॉट इजी। सबसे बड़ा जो बैरियर था वो पीपल ही इसमें थे, हाउ पीपल रिएक्ट। अब एक इंजीनियर है जो 30 ईयर्स से 40 ईयर्स से एक ही स्टाइल से काम किए जा रहे हैं, और वो अपनी जजमेंट अप्लाई करते हैं, और वो अपना उनका एक मैनुअल सिस्टम है, उनके ब्रेन में सारी नॉलेज और प्रोसेस फीड हुआ है। हाउ डू यू एक्चुअली ट्रेन दैट पर्सन टू वर्क थ्रू an automated and objective script? वो बहुत ज्यादा पोजीशन होती है, बहुत प्रॉब्लम जो है वो हमें भी फेस करनी पड़ी छोटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस होने के बावजूद। जब आप बड़े सिस्टम में काम कर रहे होते हैं तो इट गोज लॉन्ग वे, आपको वो पूरे जो है ना वो बाइंड करना पड़ता है, सबको लेके साथ में चलना पड़ता है। एंड दैट इज व्हाई इट इज इम्पोर्टेंट कि आप उन लोगों को शामिल करें उस प्रोसेस के अंदर जो यूज करेंगे उस सिस्टम को, जब आप उसको डेवलप कर रहे हो। तो इसलिए उनको वर्कशॉप्स में और उसको उसमें पार्टिसिपेट कराना बड़ा जरूरी है, क्योंकि वो आपको वहां से बाइंड मिल जाता है। वरना आप जो है वो सिस्टम को, कल्चर को और उन लोगों के बिहेवियर को चेंज नहीं कर सकते, क्योंकि आप उनको ले आके एक सिस्टम दे दें, आपने ये यूज करना है, तो वो कहेंगे हम इसको क्यों यूज करें, हम तो इस तरीके से करते हैं और इस तरह हम इसको नहीं करते। तो आपको उनको पार्ट बनाना पड़ेगा जब आप उस सिस्टम को डेवलप करेंगे।
ओके, थैंक यू सर।
ये बेसिकली एक पूरा कल्चर डेवलप करने की बात है, मतलब people and processes, and then you have to develop, end up in having a culture जिसमें ये चीजें सारी प्रमोट हों और लोग इसको समझे। मैं जब ये शुरू कर रहा था, मेरी ख्वाहिश तो ये थी कि मैं पहले 15-20 मिनट जो है ना वो एसेट पे बात करता, पिछले वाले उस सैयद उस्मान मुस्तफा वाले टॉक के अंदर। आपने जितने भी सवाल किए लोगों ने, या जो आपने एक्सप्लेन भी किया, हमें पहले एसेट को समझने की जरूरत है। हम पाकिस्तान में जब मैं जाके फ्रीलांसिंग में विजिट करता हूँ, टॉक्स अरेंज करता हूँ, तो मैंने ये देखा है कि लोगों को अपने एसेट का ही नहीं पता होता। किसी को पता ही नहीं है कि ट्रांसफार्मर के अंदर कौन सा ऑयल है, कौन सी वाइंडिंग है, किस टाइप का टाइप चेंजर है। ट्रांसफार्मर पे खड़े होके जाके बता रहे थे कि यार ये तो ऑफ लोड है, हम तो ऑन लोड समझ रहे थे। अच्छा, इसी तरह मोटर जनरेटर की बात हो तो किसी को नहीं पता कि इसके अंदर एपॉक्सी माइका है नहीं है। आई मीन आप काम कर रहे हैं वहां पर। So asset management is not only just a management function, it's knowing or providing you a framework to know your asset also and its current and future health. Nothing more from my side, I think. डॉक्टर साहब बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका, आपका बहुत ज्यादा टाइम लिया हमने, एंड आई बिलीव कि हम जब थोड़ा सा इन सब्जेक्ट्स के अंदर जाएंगे तो आपकी खिदमत हमें दोबारा भी हासिल होंगी।
एब्सोल्युटली। देखिए, ये बहुत, ये मैंने अभी सिर्फ सरफेस को स्क्रैच किया है, तो आई हैव केप्ट इट वेरी हाई लेवल। इसमें बहुत डेप्थ है, इसके अंदर मॉडल किस तरीके से डेवलप हुए हैं, एवरी एस्पेक्ट आई टच, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ डिटेल इनटू इट। उसके अंदर जाया जा सकता है, एंड देयर इज सो मच मोर we can definitely cover in other sessions if we have any opportunity. So I was very delighted, and it's a good participation. So even अगर किसी एक आदमी को भी इससे फायदा पहुंचा हो तो I would be very
डॉक्टर साहब सबसे ज्यादा तो मुझे फायदा पहुंचा है, क्योंकि मेरी एक और भी जो अब 24-25 लोग जो बचे हैं, मेरा ख्याल है डॉक्टर साहब तो खैर अपने कैरियर की पीक पर माशाल्लाह रिसर्च भी कर रहे हैं, हम पीएचडी नहीं है, लेकिन रीडिंग की हैबिट डालें, केस स्टडीज पढ़ें, IEEE के पेपर्स पढ़ें, जो लोगों के एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं वो समझने की कोशिश करें। और जो लोग अगर कराची इलेक्ट्रिक से अभी बैठे हैं, किसी भी अच्छी यूटिलिटी का एसेट मैनेजमेंट प्लान, स्ट्रेटेजिक एसेट मैनेजमेंट प्लान वो डाउनलोड करें, उसको पढ़ें। बहुत कुछ स्टफ जो है वो यूटिलिटीज ने ओपन एंडेड डॉक्यूमेंट्स की सूरत में, मतलब फ्री डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की सूरत में इंटरनेट पर रखा हुआ। किसी चीज को पढ़ना शुरू करें और आई थिंक यू विल बी एबल टू लर्न मोर एंड मोर। Thank you everyone once again. So I think we will break up here. I am
before you go, I'll just finish with this, जो आपने बात बताई है। हमारे यहाँ जो न्यूजीलैंड के जितने भी एसेट मैनेजमेंट प्लान्स हैं, जितने भी यूटिलिटीज हैं, तो बाय बिकॉज वी आर रेगुलेटेड, एंड देन मोनोपोलीज जो है वो फुल रेगुलेटेड हैं, दे हैव अ फुल डिस्क्लोजर रिक्वायरमेंट्स। तो उनके डिटेल्ड एसेट मैनेजमेंट प्लान्स सबकी वेबसाइट्स पे मौजूद है। यहाँ तक कि आपको जो मैंने आपको चार्ट्स दिखाए हैं, चीज़ें दिखाई हैं होराइजन के हवाले से या और दूसरी यूटिलिटीज के हवाले से, आप लोग हमारी वेबसाइट से जाकर बहुत ही डिटेल्ड 300-350 पेजेस के लॉन्ग डिटेल एसेट प्लान देख सकते हैं, एंड यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड हाउ वी मैनेज एसेट्स हियर। सो देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल।
ठीक हो गया। थैंक यू सो मच डॉक्टर साहब। वी विल ब्रेक अप हियर एंड इंशाल्लाह सी यू सून।
थैंक यू।
थैंक यू, टेक केयर।